So I'm now going to detail a case study that we can consider in respect of dealing with an employee suffering with anxiety or depression with both attendance and performance issues. So the employee in this case had been employed for 6 years. There had been issues with the employee's performance in the past that had not been dealt with, and he had moved departments a couple of times further to reported disagreements with his managers. The employee moved into their present department around 2 years ago. Generally, their production or performance level was lower than other members of the team. The employee had been absent from work intermittently for a number of weeks for various reasons, including stress. This situation began further to the employer trying to communicate with the employee about a change to his job title to align with his work duties. Other employees with the same job title as the employee had accepted the same proposed change to their job title in recognition that this better reflected the work that they conducted. The employee had also begun to fail to attend meetings to discuss the proposed change to his job title. The employer sent the employee to occupational health, who confirmed that the employee was suffering with anxiety. The occupational health expert advised that in their view, the impairment of anxiety amounted to a disability under the Equality Act. However, they recognised that this was a question for the Employment Tribunal and not them. In the report, a number of adjustments were recommended, including allowing the employee a later start of work time, a longer period of advance warning of meetings, and full details of what would be discussed at meetings, as well as leniency when applying any absence management process. The report was discussed with the employee by the employer, and further to this, the employer advised that unfortunately it would need to commence an absence management process due to the impact the employee's absenteeism level was having on his colleagues and the business as a whole. The employer stipulated that the employer stipulated, however, that the attendance level targets that would apply during the process would be lower than would usually be applied to other employees in order to make a reasonable adjustment to the procedure so as not to place the employee at a disadvantage compared to non-disabled employees. In addition, in order to assist, the other adjustments suggested by the occupational health expert were also applied to the employee. Then the COVID pandemic occurred and the employee was required to work from home. He found the isolation very difficult to deal with, and particularly because he lived alone. His role involved working on documents on screen and dealing directly with clients as well as dealing with emails. The employee failed to report any absence from work, and therefore the absence management process was not progressed. However, the employee's performance or output level decreased significantly. In addition, the employee was difficult to contact and he regularly failed to turn up for virtual team meetings without advance notice, later stating that the reason for this was that he had overslept as he had not been able to get to sleep the previous night, or that he felt too depressed to speak to anyone. The employee told his manager he had progressed certain work projects or completed these, but it later became apparent that this was not the case, resulting in other team members having to pick up the work at short notice and making it stressful for them as well as the line manager. So the strain was being put on the team and the line manager. It was causing resentment. It became clear that in order to avoid an absence management process being progressed, what the employee was doing was continuing to work, but his performance or production level was unreasonably low. When questioned about this, the employee admitted that with hindsight, he had been working when he should have actually been off sick. However, he felt he could do some work as he was working from home. He said that if he had needed to have left the house to attend work, he probably would have determined himself as unfit to do so and called in sick. He said that if he had attended work, his employer probably would have noticed that he was too unwell to work and sent him home. He said he was finding it very difficult to determine if he was too ill to work while working at home. And I think that is, potentially what's been happening with many employees. So clearly the situation couldn't continue and action needed to be taken. What would you do faced with a similar situation? So obviously in the case, the employer was really concerned about the employee's mental health and well-being, but also it had concerns about the mental health of the employee's immediate colleagues, the team who were having to take on more work and juggle more work. And actually the line manager was suffering herself from mental issues because of the stress the situation was causing. The employee's employer discussed the situation with the employee on an informal basis and strongly suggested that they see their GP. As the occupational health report had been obtained pre-COVID, the employer arranged for the employee to go and see occupational health again so that an up-to-date medical report could be obtained. The employee was also signposted to appropriate resources, and it was suggested that the employee access the Bupa advice line, which was a facility or benefit that was offered to employees by the employer. After the meeting, the occupational health expert was instructed. The up-to-date issues were detailed in the instruction letter. Specific questions were put to the expert about the employee's up-to-date health position and the employee's ability to undertake the work in their role. A detailed job or work description was sent to the occupational health expert with the instruction letter. The occupational health expert was also asked to provide their views on any adjustments that could be made to the job or work situation generally, which may assist the employee in performing their work. In the meantime, and as the report was awaited, further discussion with the employee occurred, and the employer made clear communications relating to the requirements on the employee and made some temporary changes to the employee's duties to assist them. So these included the employer making it clear to the employee that if he was working and so had not reported in sick in accordance with the sickness reporting procedure, he would be treated as working by his employer and his performance would be considered as such. If, however, the employee felt he was too ill to get up on time, get dressed and travel to work, albeit in fact he was working from home, he should then report in sick in accordance with the sickness absence reporting procedure. It was made clear that the onus was on the employee to determine if he was too ill to get ready and travel to work. And I appreciate, this was an artificial situation, but it was the only way that the employer could think of to try and assist the employee in determining whether or not they were fit enough to actually work. The employee's line manager also made it very clear that the employee was required to attend all virtual team meetings and on time unless he reported in sick and was too ill to attend the meeting that day. The employer also confirmed to the employee that their normal working hours were 7 hours per day, to be worked from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. with an hour's lunch break, usually to be taken between 1 p.m. and 2 p.m. But due to the employee's difficulties in commencing work at 9 a.m. on some occasions due to problems sleeping, The employee's normal working day would be adjusted to be worked from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. with an hour for lunch when the employee required this. In addition, the employee was to ensure that he had 5 minutes break each hour away from the screen, in addition to the usual 1 hour lunch break. The employer required the employee to draft a brief daily timesheet that he could provide to the employer each week. A weekly review meeting was to take place between the employee's line manager and the employee, at which the timesheet could be discussed and any issues relating to the employee's health or work could also be spoken about. For a temporary period and until the occupational health report was obtained, the employer only required the employee to work on one document at a time, as the employee became very anxious when determining which document of a number should be prioritised by him. So in effect, what the line manager did was take the decision on prioritising tasks away from the employee as a temporary reasonable adjustment. Other employees in the team were working on 7 documents at a time. So this is compared with the employee in question who was only being given 1 to work on at a time. Further, at the end of each working day, the employee's line manager required the employee to notify her of his progress on the particular document he had been working on and save what he had done to the server. And this was to ensure that the line manager was aware of the stage the employee had reached on the particular document or documents generally, so that if the employee was then off sick the next working day, a colleague or the line manager could pick up the work quickly, and she was fully aware of fully aware of the stage that the employee had reached on that particular document. In addition, for a temporary period and until the report was obtained, the employee's line manager confirmed that she would deal with all communications with clients that the employee was dealing with, but would copy the employee into those emails. So again, taking away that stress, that pressure that the employee was anxious about. Also, a discussion occurred about the structure of the employee's working day. So the employee's line manager worked with the employee to apply some structure to the day so that the employee allocated set times to work on documents and other times to consider and deal with emails. The employee was urged to use an automatic email response when he was working on documents, so that he didn't feel pressurised to respond to emails, and he could concentrate on the document that he was working on. By providing this structure to working day, it was hoped that the employee could feel more in control. The time it took for the report to be obtained was around 5 weeks, because the employee failed to attend the first appointment with occupational health, and then after the second appointment, the employee took some time considering the report and requiring some amendments to be made to it. During the time it took for a report to be obtained, the employee had taken a total of 8 days off during that 5-week period, some of which had been a combination of half days, and he had been unable to complete a document in the timescale that had been required. Further, he had failed to turn up to an internal virtual meeting, failed to provide daily updates on every day, and he had failed to send his manager the timesheets at the appropriate time on some occasions. The report was obtained and a number of adjustments were recommended within this. The occupational health expert advised that a risk assessment be conducted on the job in order to identify the risk factors and to work with the employee to try and remove or reduce these. The expert stated that the employee had felt the current adjustments to the employee's work, i.e. working on one document at a time, and the employee not communicating with clients had actually assisted him. And on this basis, the occupational health expert said that if these adjustments could continue, then that would be beneficial to the employee. A recommendation was also suggested of reducing the employee's working hours, but only if this was possible operationally. The report was discussed with the employee. The employee stated that he did not wish to reduce his working hours in recognition that if this was done, and if it was operationally feasible to do so, which it may not have been, this would have incurred a decrease in the employee's pay, which the employee didn't want to experience the decrease in pay. So a list of objectives or criteria were drafted for the employee to meet by reference to the employee's job or work description. Reasonable adjustments were made to this list to ensure the employee was not placed at a disadvantage. So, for example, the usual attendance level that is required in the business was reduced, and this revised criteria became the one that the employee was required to meet. In addition, the usual situation of an employee working on 7 documents at any one time was reduced to 2, having been 1, and then to be gradually increased on a phased basis, but to a maximum of 4, which was obviously lower than the norm, but regarded by the employer as being a reasonable adjustment. The 7-hour working day was actually reduced to 6 to take into account a reasonable level of away from screen time and movement time during the working day to be taken at regular intervals. The employer also continued to allow the employee to work from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. when needed. In addition, the employer permitted the employee to work from the office 1 day a week. However, clearly communicated COVID secure health and safety measures were to be adhered to, and they were communicated to the employee. The employee was also provided with a printer and ink so that he could print out some documents to again reduce the amount of screen time. The employee's attendance and work performance was then monitored against the objectives and criteria over a monitoring period of 4 weeks. The weekly review meetings were held during this time, and a reasonable level of support was provided to the employee. The support offered included regular communication with the employee about his health, signposting the employee to mental health assistance resources, and urging the employee to see his employer and access the BEPA helpline. Unfortunately, the employee's attendance and performance level did not meet the objectives and criteria during the monitoring period, despite the reasonable adjustments that had been made. And therefore, the employee was invited to a first formal capability hearing to discuss the situation. The employee attended the second arranged hearing, having failed to attend the first, and was accompanied at this by a trade union representative. After the hearing, the employee was issued with a first written warning, which they subsequently appealed. The appeal process was dealt with, but alongside this, the employee continued to be monitored against the attendance and performance targets and criteria. Clearly, the situation was a very uncomfortable one, both for the employer and the line manager, as well as the team. In addition, the pressure on the team continued. It was recognised that it would have been easier to manage the employee if they had actually been on long-term sick. In this case, at this point, the situation was resolved through a protected conversation. However, if this hadn't occurred, then the employer would have needed to proceed to the next stage, including further monitoring, a further capability hearing, a final written warning being issued, further monitoring again, and then a further hearing, and then dismissal on notice. The employee again being given the opportunity to appeal the final written warning as well as the dismissal on notice. Before dismissal as well, depending on the length of time that had occurred since the initial or the second occupational health report had been obtained, the employer may have needed to obtain a further medical report. So that procedure that I've detailed to you accords with the ACAS Code of Practice. However, when dealing with employees with anxiety and depression or other mental health issues, this procedure could actually create more anxiety and stress, and no doubt does. I've experienced cases where an employee stated that they're suicidal, and then the employer is having to grapple with that very serious threat to the employee's health and safety, as well as dealing with internal pressures of meeting internal targets, financial targets, and also dealing with potential mental health issues from other team members who are suffering with an excessive workload. It's not easy, and it's so important, therefore, to try and include occupational health at an early stage, particularly if the employee isn't receiving treatment via their GP. It's also imperative that an employee is adequately supported at meetings. It may well be a reasonable adjustment for the employee to be accompanied by a friend or a relative at internal meetings, even if your internal procedures don't allow for this, so making a reasonable adjustment to those. There are clearly difficulties with ensuring you're catering for the health and safety of the particular employee, as well as health and safety of the other team members. And as I said before, as well as dealing with internal pressures of meeting targets. I appreciate as well the frustrations in the length of these procedures, and practically managing these on top of workloads and them taking a long time is, as I say, frustrating and difficult. But unfortunately, there's no quick fix in dealing with these issues. And that's why it's so imperative to try and get occupational health involved at an early stage and to start the procedures. It's easy to think these procedures are too lengthy, too cumbersome, we haven't got time to start them, and then ignore the issues, because that will only make matters worse. I know that's easy for me to say, but in terms of if an employee is then taken through a formal process, they may turn around and say, well, my performance has always been at this level, why is it now an issue when it wasn't then? So early start of these procedures, because of the length of time they will take, an early instruction of occupational health will really help in managing the situation. And if a procedure is dealt with well, then there may be an opportunity to have a protected conversation, which would resolve the issues both for the employer and the employee. Okay, thank you.